You are listening to the Horse Radio Network, part of the Equine Network family.
Hi everyone, this is the Ask Annie podcast, Horse Girl reviews on products you use. ClariFly Larvicide is more than just a fly control product. It is the first step towards improving horse comfort and keeping nuisance flies out of your stables. This feed additive uses an active ingredient that passes through the digestive system of horses and is expelled in their manure, where it stops flies in their larval stage. By using ClariFly Larvicide as part of an IPM program with Starbar Products, you'll get more support, more expertise, and more control. Visit centralflycontrol.com to learn more or contact your local feed dealer. I'm excited to welcome back to the podcast Mark Upton, the Senior Director of Ag Products at Central Life Sciences. Mark joined me on episode 59 to discuss ClariFly Larvicide, so if you haven't listened to that episode yet, you definitely should, and I'll link it in the show notes. Mark graduated from Oklahoma State University with a degree in business administration and started working for Central Life Sciences in 2002. He was the national sales manager for 12 years at Central Life Sciences. He then moved to Diamond V Feeds for 2 years before returning to Central Life Sciences in 2014, where he's been ever since. Mark grew up on a large ranch in eastern Oklahoma and currently lives just south of Oklahoma City. Thank you for joining us again, Mark.
Thank you for having me, Annie. I really look forward to visiting with you.
Same, likewise. So we are back to discuss the intricacies of ClariFly Larvicide, which is a feed-through fly control product. Can you give us a recap of what ClariFly is and why it works so well for horses?
I absolutely can. It is a feed-through. So what we're trying to do is get ClariFly into the manure. So we're feeding it to the animal, just using their mouth as a mechanism to put it out the other end. It's known, so the ClariFly is the trade name. It's actually the product is diflubenzuron, and there'll be a spelling test at the end, Annie. And so what it's called a chitin synthesis inhibitor. So similar to your fingernails, insects have a hard exoskeleton, and so this prevents them that exoskeleton's made of chitin, and this prevents them from forming that chitin or that exoskeleton, and so. It's a preventative or a prevention strategy. You're trying to prevent them from having a lot of flies around versus trying to kill adult flies. And you can't always do that, but it's a good tool in the toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. What pests are especially harmful to horses that ClariFly helps mitigate?
So as far as the health of the horse, I guess you could have such a tremendous fly load on a horse, especially flies that suck blood. I guess you could have so many on an animal that you could cause some anemia issues and stuff like that. But we don't really think of health issues with a horse as much as we do with cattle or swine, something like that. Typically, flies on a horse are nuisances. Now, there is a fly called a stable fly that is a blood feeder, and it doesn't take but a few stable flies to get on a horse's legs, and they'll kick the trailer or kick the stall, and I mean they could bring harm to themselves. But typically it's a nuisance, and usually it is the stable fly or a house fly. If you've got horses in a stall, you're out cleaning stalls and flies are just flying all over you, those are house flies, and they are a nuisance. They're nasty. They're a filthy fly. We won't go into what's happening when that fly lands on your hot dog at a picnic. But they're really just a nuisance to the horse and just drive them and you crazy. So in wet times of the year, you'll have what's called a deer fly. It's a larger fly, and it's landing on the horse and it's pulling blood. And again, you could run into so much of that you're causing some loss of blood issues. But typically it's just an annoyance. It just drives you nuts, and it drives them nuts.
And do the components in ClariFly react to all of these different types of flies?
Yeah, the deer fly, or what we would call a horse fly, probably not. They tend to lay their eggs and breed and everything around running water, streams and things. And so usually not. But the other flies, yes, if they will lay their eggs in manure, then ClariFly is very much going to help. So here's what happens. You've got your horses in a stall, or you may have them in a small pen. They're using the bathroom, putting out manure, and it's mixing in with organic matter, some spilt hay or some shavings or something like that. If you're cleaning stalls into a wheelbarrow and dumping the wheelbarrow where you're dumping that's the perfect environment for those flies, especially house flies, to lay their eggs. And so it's just important to keep that cleaned up. A stable fly, they're a little harder to control because they'll fly to the animal, they'll take a blood meal, and then they're immediately leaving. And they like to go hang out in tall grass, tall weeds, things like that. And so again, we want to try to control the manure so that they're not laying eggs there. And in the case of a stable fly, keep the tall grass mowed, keep the weeds mowed, keep things cleaned up so that they don't have a place to hang out. The one thing I'll say about ClariFly, and I mentioned it a while ago, it's a really good tool in the toolbox. If you only use ClariFly around your horses, you're probably not going to be real happy with the results. There's some other things you need to do as well. Some of that's management, keep manure cleaned up and things like that, keep your grass mowed, and some of it is products. You can use some other products to try to kill some adult flies or things like that will help it all work. But typically, when you have animals in confinement, you're going to have to use more than one tool in that toolbox.
Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned we were talking about the type of pests that flies are a nuisance to horses, a really
Yes,
big
ma'am.
nuisance. But besides like your horse acting uncomfortable, what are other signs that you might have a fly infestation or a fly problem?
Oh, one of the things you'll find, so there's another fly called a horn fly, and horn flies don't lay their eggs in horse manure because it's too dry. They like cattle manure. But let's say you've got your horses at your place, and then you've got a neighbor that has cows, and if he's got a big horn fly problem, those flies will get on the horse. And I'll tell you how you know if it's horn flies. First of all, it's a little bitty fly. They look like a house fly, but are about half the size. But if you've got a horse, especially out on pasture, and that could be a big pasture or just a paddock, but if you walk out and feel under their belly, if you find a sore under there, there won't be any hair. It'll be a little bit raised, and you can scratch it, and they'll stick their neck out. It feels good to them. That's horn flies. So horn flies only feed on blood, and what they'll do is they'll pick a place right up in the middle of the back or right up in the middle of the belly where they can't get to with their tail or their mouth, their muzzle, and that's where they'll feed. You can scratch on it, and it feels good to them. It's real itchy to them. That is a sign that horn flies are a problem. And about the only way you can control that is two things. Get your neighbor to control the flies on his cows, or you can use some fly sprays to try to keep those horn flies off. The other thing you'll find with a heavy housefly infestation is sometimes you will see a little bit of drainage around the eyes. If there's especially if you got them tied up and they're having a hard time keeping the flies off themselves, you'll see a little bit of drainage around the eyes. You'll see the flies on. They'll be stomping. They're in their stall and you just hear them stomp. Well, that's those flies on them. And boy, you think about the health of the feet and legs of a horse anyway, and now they're just stomping those legs, those feet, trying to get the flies off of them. Constant movement with the tail. If you've got them turned out, if they can, they'll like to roll. They want to get dust and stuff on them. Think about as a kid going to the zoo and you see the elephants roll or take their trunk and throw dust up. Well, that's exactly why. They're trying to fight those flies. So there's some pretty good signs. I mentioned a while ago, stable flies, they hurt when they pierce the skin to take a blood meal, and so the horses will oftentimes try to kick. But it's typically just irritation. You can just tell that the animal is irritated and they're trying to get the insect off of them.
Yeah, those are all really, really good signs. If we were going to start ClariFly Larvicide, when would be the best time? And will it still work if you start ClariFly and you have a fly infestation?
Absolutely. It's best to start just ahead of the fly season. You want to start wherever you're emptying, especially if you have horses up in stalls. You want to start the process, a couple of weeks ahead of the fly season, so that when you're cleaning those stalls and emptying the wheelbarrows or whatever you're doing with it, you want to start getting the ClariFly out there, because it takes about 60-degree weather for flies to start showing up. Once you start hitting 60 degrees, they're going to start showing up again. So you want to have everything treated so that if they lay an egg, you're locking it down. your hard kill strategies, if you want to use sprays or baits or something like that, you can wait a little bit longer. But ClariFly needs to start right ahead of the fly season. And probably more importantly, is keep using it until the flies are gone. You need a good hard killing frost before you quit doing, taking out your measures to kill the flies.
Yeah, so really the whole summer season.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It doesn't take. So I'll give you an example. It's the end of June now. I was in Florida for the Florida Cattlemen's Convention last week, and so my horses went about 4 days. I had somebody hired to feed, but it's just not the same when you're here taking care of stuff. And so all of the measures that I use weren't being implemented last week while I was gone, and I had a little bump in flies. So I took me a couple 3 days. I got back control of it, and my fly population is very manageable now. But yeah, it's never too late to start. There's an ideal time, but it's never too late. Once you say I'm sick of fighting it, get ClariFly in the feed, do some other things to try to kill down those adults. But the best thing is management. The best thing doesn't cost you a lot of money. It's just keeping the manure spread, keeping the grass mowed. Do some things to help yourself. You don't have to necessarily run to town and buy a lot of products. Do what you can do from a management standpoint, and then supplement that with products such as ClariFly.
Yeah, I love that you just went right into my next question, but we talked to Andrea Bolduck a few weeks ago, one of your coworkers, about IPM, the Integrated Pest Management Program, on episode 82. How does ClariFly work into that style of program?
Well, I'll tell you what I do. So I've got 6 or 8 head of horses standing around here, and I've also got a herd of cows as well. And so I have my cows on a different feed through that we have to control the horn flies. But for the horses specifically, so you have to remember that the housefly especially rests high. So when they're up high in a structure, they're looking for a place to land and rest. If they're feeding, they're down low. So I use sticky traps up high. I want to catch those adult flies when they're trying to rest. And so I use a sticky trap up high. And then down low, I use baits. We have a product called Quick Strike abatement strip. And so I use those a lot. We have a new aerosol called Aviator. That's a spray-on attractant. It's a bait. If you spray the fly, it won't kill it. It's a bait. He has to consume some of it, and they die. So I'm attacking them from all angles. I want the manure treated, but then any adults, and you're always going to have some adults, I want to do some things to try to knock those down as well. The heat will help once we get out of this, the wet time. Insects need moisture. And so once the temperatures get high and we begin to dry out for the summer, that's going to help you. Mother Nature will help you as well. But between a feed through and then doing some things to try to kill some adults, I keep a really good control of the fly population in my facility.
Yeah, like you said, just another tool in the toolbox.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yeah. If you have one fly in one specific area, you can do one thing. But when we have horses up, it's not one fly, and there's not one thing you can do to control the whole problem.
I wanted to circle back on your tenure at Central Life Sciences. You've been with this company for a total of 24 years, is that right?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, ma'am.
Congratulations.
Yes, ma'am.
What innovations have you seen over this time?
Well, Annie, I'm old. I went from the rotary dial phone to now we have cell phones, so I've seen a lot. So really, in the 24 years, there's been a lot of change. We see a lot of new chemistry for fly control. So a lot of different products that we can use. We see a lot of different ways to use that chemistry. So I mentioned this aerosol spray. For many years, if you wanted something that was a bait that the fly had to consume, then it was something you'd scatter on the ground. Well, but then you've got other animals that could get your dogs or your cats could get into it, and that wouldn't be good. So you find new and unique ways to get this chemistry to the problem. And it's a lot of fun. We have a staff of entomologists and chemists. And so it's a lot of fun to work with them. It's a lot of fun to bring new ideas. We look at things that are maybe being used in other countries other than the United States, and see if we can bring some of those technologies to the U.S. It's interesting. We have to work through the EPA, the Environmental Protection Agency, and that sometimes is challenging, to say the least. But again, it's just a lot of fun to look at these products. There is over the last several years, there seems to be a desire to go to more green type products and essential oils and stuff. And so we work with that a lot. We're all constantly looking for these green type products that will work. And by the way, I will say, not to get us off on a tangent, but there are some green products that work really well. But I can tell you right now, just because they're natural doesn't mean they work well. And they can be, in all honesty, they can be more harmful to the animal than the chemistry that we use. If you're not careful with some of these essential oils, you can cause some blistering, you can cause some severe issues with livestock. So I don't know, I just enjoy it. The biggest thing I do is, or the most fun I have is I like working with producers. I like visiting with people who own horses. I like walking out through a set of cows. I don't enjoy walking through hog barns a whole lot, though I do that sometimes. But I enjoy talking with people that have livestock, and I just enjoy that way of life.
Yeah, absolutely. Is that what you would say is what keeps you excited after 2 decades at a company?
Oh, it absolutely is. Very
Yeah.
much so. Yeah, very much so. I mentioned I was in Florida last week for the Florida Cattlemen's, and it's so fun to sit down there and talk to those guys that are, running 10, 12, 14,000 head of cows. And I've got a buddy right down the road that sell preps horses. I enjoy walking through his barn and looking at what he's doing. So yeah, I really enjoy getting out and looking at livestock and just finding different ways to make things work. It's just a lot of fun for me. There's only so many hours a day you can sit in an office and stare at a computer screen. So it breaks up the monotony.
Yeah, I bet you get to see a lot of cool and unique and different operations from all those different species and across the country. Oh, that's pretty cool.
I'll be honest with you, Annie. I don't get to do this so much anymore, but early in my career with Central, I traveled, I've been in all 50 states and now 6 or 7 countries talking about flies. And you talk about some neat things. I mean, that I've enjoyed that. It was a lot of late nights, a lot of early mornings, a lot of miles, but it's very neat to see how people in different states or different countries handle problems and how they come up with solutions. So many people just feel like, whether it's flies or whatever, it's the problem is the problem and there's nothing I can do about it. And that's just so far from the truth. In today's world, there's always a solution for just dang near anything. So I guess my biggest piece of advice is just reach out, whether it's the local feed store or go to our website, centralflycontrol.com, and reach out for help. If we've got the product to help solve the problem, we'll recommend it. If we don't, we'll recommend some other company's products that we've tried and we know that works. So yeah, don't just suffer with the problem. Let's find a way to find a solution.
Thanks for tuning in. Learn more about the Ask Annie podcast by following us on Facebook, Instagram, and Pinterest at Ask Annie Podcast. Have a suggestion for a product you'd like me to use in an upcoming episode? Email me at askanniepodcast@gmail.com or leave a comment on any of our social media pages. Find even more Ask Annie episodes anywhere you listen to podcasts, including Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and many more. The Ask Annie podcast is a production of the Equine Podcast Network, an entity of Equine Network, LLC.